The moment Elias Grant pushed open that barn door on Christmas night, he expected to find nothing but sleeping cattle and the familiar scent of hay. What he found instead was a choice that would shatter the carefully constructed walls around his broken heart. A young woman collapsed in the hayloft, her lips blue with cold, clutching an infant who had stopped crying hours ago. In less than 5 minutes, they would both be dead. He had 60 seconds to decide: walk away and preserve the safe emptiness he'd built, or step back into the terrifying vulnerability of caring whether someone lived or died. This is their story. If you stay until the end, please hit that like button and comment with your city. I want to see how far this tale of second chances travels across the world. The wind that Christmas night didn't howl, it screamed. It came tearing across the Montana plains like something alive and furious, hurling snow against the weathered boards of Elias Grant's ranch house, seeking every crack and crevice where warmth might hide. Inside his cabin, Elias sat in the leather chair that had been his father's, staring at a fire that gave heat but no comfort, listening to the storm rage against the only home he'd ever known. He was 43 years old, and he had perfected the art of being alone. The clock on the mantel, one of the few things he'd kept from before, ticked toward 9. Outside, the temperature had dropped below 0, the kind of cold that killed quickly, mercifully, if you were foolish enough to be caught in it. Elias had seen it happen. Cattle frozen standing up. A traveling salesman found 3 miles from town, peaceful as sleep. Winter in Montana didn't negotiate. He drained the last of his coffee, now cold, and set the cup down with the deliberate care of a man whose every movement was measured, controlled. No wasted motion, no unnecessary sound. The cabin was clean to the point of sterility, dishes washed and put away, floor swept, everything in its place. A home that looked like no one lived there, which was precisely how Elias wanted it. But the animals still needed checking. With a sigh that came from somewhere deep and tired, he rose and reached for his coat. Heavy sheepskin, worn soft over years of use. His hat. Thick gloves. The woolen scarf his mother had knitted before the influenza took her, back when he was still a boy who believed good people didn't die for no reason. He wrapped it around his face until only his eyes showed, gray as winter sky and just as warm. The door fought him when he opened it, the wind trying to keep him inside or hurl him into the darkness. He couldn't tell which. He leaned into it, a big man made bigger by layers of wool and leather, and stepped out onto the porch. Snow immediately stung his exposed skin, tiny knives of ice that made his eyes water. The barn was only 50 yards away, but it might as well have been 50 miles. Elias put his head down and walked, each step a battle against wind that wanted to push him sideways, backward, anywhere but forward. The snow was knee-deep already, deeper in the drifts, and still falling so thick he could barely see the barn's dark shape ahead. His lantern swung wild, throwing crazy shadows that danced and died in the white chaos around him. 15 years ago, he'd walked this same path in weather just like this, hurrying home from a neighbor's ranch where he'd stayed too long over cards and whiskey. He'd found his wife Sarah in bed with a fever, their 2-year-old daughter Emma burning up beside her. By morning, the fever had taken them both. Just like that. While he'd been laughing over a straight flush and his 3rd glass of bourbon, his whole world had ended. He didn't play cards anymore, didn't drink, didn't stay too long anywhere. The barn door was frozen shut, ice having sealed it closed. Elias had to kick it 3 times, hard, before it finally gave way with a crack that sounded like breaking bones. He stumbled inside and the wind slammed the door shut behind him with a bang that echoed through the rafters. Sudden silence, except for the muffled roar of the storm outside. Elias stood still for a moment, breathing hard, frost forming on his scarf from his own breath. The barn was dark except for his lantern, but warmer than outside. The body heat of the animals and the insulation of thick walls making it almost bearable. He could hear the cattle shifting in their stalls, the soft whicker of his 2 horses. "Easy," he called out, his voice rough from disuse. He didn't talk much, even to animals. "Just checking on you, on..." He made his rounds methodically. Checked the water troughs, frozen on top, but he'd filled them before dinner and the animals had enough to get through the night. Checked the hay racks, full. Counted heads, all present. He'd lost a calf to wolves the week before, and it had put him in the habit of being thorough. Everything was as it should be. He was turning to leave, already thinking about the fire waiting back at the cabin, when he heard it. A sound so soft, so out of place, that at first he thought he'd imagined it. A whimper, barely audible over the storm. Almost animal, but not quite. Elias froze, his hand on the door. The sound came again from above, from the hayloft. His first thought was wolves. They sometimes denned up in barns during the worst storms, and God help you if you cornered one. His second thought was that wolves didn't whimper like that. That sound was human, or had been human before the cold had started stealing the life from it. Hello? His voice came out sharper than he intended, echoing off the walls. No answer, just that sound again, weaker now, dying. Elias raised his lantern and moved toward the ladder that led up to the loft. His heart was pounding in a way that had nothing to do with the cold. Every instinct he'd developed over 15 years of careful isolation told him to walk away. Whatever was up there wasn't his problem. Couldn't be his problem. He'd built his life around not having problems that involved other people. His boot hit the first rung of the ladder, the second, the third. His head cleared the loft floor, and he raised the lantern higher. For a moment, his mind couldn't process what he was seeing. It was too impossible, too far outside the realm of things that should exist in his barn on Christmas night. A trick of the light, a hallucination brought on by cold and isolation. But hallucinations didn't breathe frost into the air. A woman lay in the hay, curled into a tight ball against the cold. Her coat, thin, inadequate, designed for autumn, not winter, was crusted with ice. Her hair, dark and matted with snow, fell across a face that was pale as death. And in her arms, wrapped in what looked like every scrap of clothing she owned, was a bundle that could only be one thing: an infant. Neither was moving. "Jesus Christ," Elias whispered, and in that moment all his carefully constructed walls crumbled to dust. He was up the ladder in seconds, his lantern hung on a nail, his gloves already off. He dropped to his knees beside the woman and pressed 2 fingers to her throat, praying for something he didn't believe in anymore. Her skin was ice. For a terrible moment he felt nothing. Then, there. A pulse. Faint as a whisper, but there. "Ma'am," he said, his voice urgent now, his hands moving to her shoulders. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" Nothing. She was beyond hearing, beyond responding, somewhere in that gray place between life and death, where the cold took you, and whispered that sleep would be so much easier than fighting. Elias turned his attention to the bundle in her arms. She was clutching it with the last of her strength, frozen fingers locked around it even in unconsciousness. He had to pry them loose, gentle but firm, his heart in his throat. The cloth fell away. A baby. Tiny. Maybe 6 months old, maybe younger. A girl, judging by the small pink dress visible under layers of makeshift wrapping. Her lips were blue. Her small face was still. But when he pressed his ear close to her mouth, he felt it, the barest brush of breath against his cheek. Alive. Both of them. Barely. "Okay," Elias said, talking to himself now, to the fear rising in his chest. "Okay. Think." He couldn't warm them here. The barn was shelter from the wind, but nothing more. They needed heat, real heat, and fast. But the cabin was 50 yards away through a blizzard. Carrying both of them, he'd be lucky to make it himself, let alone keep them from freezing. But leaving them here meant watching them die. Not a choice at all, really. Elias stripped off his coat and wrapped it around the woman, then bundled the baby inside his shirt, against his chest where his body heat might do some good. The infant was so light, so terribly fragile. He could feel her tiny heart beating against his ribs, fast and desperate. "Stay with me," he murmured, buttoning his shirt over her. "Just stay with me." The woman was dead weight when he lifted her. Small, probably no more than 100 pounds, but unconscious people were always heavier than you expected. He got her over his shoulder in a fireman's carry, grabbed his lantern, and made for the ladder. Getting down one-handed, with a woman over his shoulder and a baby against his chest, was a special kind of hell. Twice his boot slipped on the rungs. The second time he nearly dropped her, and his heart stopped until he caught his balance. The cattle watched him with placid, unconcerned eyes, chewing their cud. The barn door fought him again on the way out, and then he was in the storm. 50 yards had never seemed so far. The wind hit him like a physical blow, and he staggered. Snow drove into his face, blinding him. He could barely see the cabin, just a dark shape that might have been anywhere. The woman's weight pulled at his shoulder. The baby was frighteningly still against his chest. He walked. One step. Another. The snow was deeper now, grabbing at his boots. His lantern blew out, plunging everything into white darkness. He kept walking, using memory instead of sight, counting steps, praying he was going straight and not angling off into the empty prairie where they'd find him in spring, frozen in a drift with two strangers he'd died trying to save. 20 steps. 30. His boot hit something solid, the porch steps. He'd made it. The cabin door was unlocked. He never locked it. What was the point? And he crashed through it more than opened it, stumbling into the warmth and light. He kicked the door shut behind him, cutting off the wind's howl, and for a moment just stood there, breathing hard, ice cracking off his scarf. Then he moved, the fire first. He laid the woman on the floor in front of it, close but not too close, and checked her pulse again. Still there, still fighting. He unwrapped the baby from his shirt and laid her beside her mother, then built up the fire until it roared, feeding it log after log until his small cabin was almost too warm. Blankets next. He had plenty, wool, thick, the kind that held heat. He stripped the wet coat off the woman, pulled off her frozen boots, wrapped her in layer after layer of wool. The baby too, creating a small nest of warmth around her tiny body. The woman's lips were still blue. Her breathing was shallow, rattling. Hypothermia. Severe. He'd seen it before in cattle that survived the winter barely, and the treatment was always the same, warmth, slow and steady, and time. But the baby worried him more. She was so small, so still. He picked her up carefully, this tiny life that weighed almost nothing, and held her close to the fire. Her face was pinched, old-looking the way sick babies got. When he touched her cheek, she didn't respond. "Come on," he whispered, and was startled to hear the break in his own voice. "Come on, little one. Fight." Minutes passed. He sat cross-legged on the floor, holding the baby, watching the woman breathe, feeding the fire. The clock ticked. The storm raged outside. His world had shrunk to this: a cabin, a fire, two strangers who would be dead if he'd checked the barn 5 minutes later. Then the baby made a sound. A small sound, barely a whimper, but it was life. Her eyelids fluttered. Her small mouth opened in what might have been the beginning of a cry, though no sound came out. But her cheeks were pinking up, just slightly, and when he touched her hand, her tiny fingers curled around his thumb with surprising strength. "That's it," Elias breathed. "That's it. You fight." And she did. Over the next hour, he watched color return to her small face, watched her breathing deepen and steady, watched her eyes open, dark eyes, aware and frightened and alive. When she finally did cry, it was the most beautiful sound Elias had heard in 15 years. He found milk in his cold box. He kept a cow for such purposes and warmed it carefully, testing it on his wrist the way some long-buried instinct told him to. The baby drank greedily when he offered it in a clean cloth, sucking it down with desperate hunger that spoke of hours or maybe days without food. "Easy," he murmured, the word coming without thought. "Easy. There's more. You don't have to rush." While the baby fed, he turned his attention back to the woman. She was warming too, but slower. Her breathing was better, less labored, but she hadn't stirred. He checked her over as best he could without undressing her. No obvious injuries, no signs of frostbite except maybe on her fingertips, which were an angry red. Her hands were rough, calloused. Working hands. Her dress, visible under the blankets, was plain homespun, mended in several places. Poor. Traveling, caught in the storm. But that didn't explain what she was doing in his barn. The nearest town was Redemption, 12 miles south, and the nearest neighbor was 6 miles east. No one traveled through here without good reason, and no one traveled in winter with a baby unless they were running from something or had nowhere else to go. The baby finished the milk and regarded Elias with those dark, serious eyes. She was calmer now, warm and fed, though she watched him with the wariness of a small creature that had learned the world was not kind. He estimated her age at 6 months, maybe 7, old enough to sit up, too young to walk. The kind of age Sarah had loved, when Emma had been all gummy smiles and grabbing hands, and Elias shut that thought down hard. He made a bed for the baby in a drawer from his bureau, padded with blankets, and set it close to the fire where he could watch her. She didn't protest, just looked at him with those knowing eyes until sleep finally took her. He watched her chest rise and fall for a long minute, making sure, then forced himself to look away. The woman slept on. In the firelight, with color returning to her face, he could see she was young, maybe 25, maybe younger. There was something in her face even in sleep, a hardness around the eyes, a tightness to her mouth, that spoke of life lived difficult. Her dark hair, drying now in the heat, curled around her face in a way that would have been pretty if she'd had the luxury of caring about such things. Elias pulled another chair close to the fire and sat, watching them both. He should sleep. It was late, near midnight now, and he had morning chores regardless of what Christmas night had brought him. But he couldn't bring himself to leave them. Not yet. Every few minutes, he checked. Were they still breathing? Still warm? Still alive? The storm howled on outside, shaking the cabin walls. Somewhere in the night, Christmas became the day after. The fire crackled and popped. The baby whimpered in her sleep, and Elias reached over without thinking to rock the drawer gently until she settled. It was near dawn when the woman finally stirred. A small movement first, her hand twitching under the blankets. Then her eyes opened, unfocused, confused. They moved around the cabin, trying to make sense of unfamiliar walls, an unfamiliar fire. Then they found Elias sitting in his chair watching her, and he saw fear spike bright and sudden in their depths. She tried to sit up, got tangled in the blankets, fell back. Her hand moved to her chest, searching, and when it found nothing, panic flooded her face. "My baby," she gasped, her voice hoarse and breaking. "Where's my baby?" "Safe," Elias said quickly, holding up both hands in a gesture of peace. "She's right here. She's safe." He stood and moved to the drawer, lifting it so the woman could see. The baby was sleeping, pink-cheeked and peaceful, completely unaware of her mother's terror. The woman stared at her for a long moment, and Elias saw her lips move in what might have been a prayer, or just thanks, or maybe just the release of fear held too long. "She's okay?" Her eyes moved back to Elias, and he was struck by how dark they were, almost black in the firelight. Beautiful eyes, if they hadn't been so full of fear and exhaustion. "She's okay," Elias confirmed. "I fed her, warmed her. She's been sleeping about 3 hours now." The woman closed her eyes, and he saw a single tear track down her cheek. "Thank you," she whispered. "God, thank you." Then her eyes opened again, and the wariness was back. She pulled the blankets up to her chin, suddenly aware of her situation, alone in a strange cabin with a strange man, weak and vulnerable. Her gaze swept the room, looking for exits, for weapons, for anything that might help if this turned bad. Elias saw the calculation in her eyes and understood it. He stayed where he was, careful not to move too fast, and kept his voice gentle. "My name is Elias Grant. This is my ranch. I found you in my barn about 5 hours ago. You were pretty far gone, both of you." He paused. "Do you remember how you got there?" She studied him for a long moment, and he let her. He knew what she saw. A big man, over 6 feet, broad-shouldered from years of ranch work, beard going gray. Eyes that probably looked hard because they'd seen hard things, the kind of man who could be dangerous if he wanted to be. But maybe she also saw the gentleness with which he'd lifted the drawer to show her the baby, the way he kept his distance, the fact that she was warm and covered and her child was safe. Something in her face shifted, just slightly. "Hannah," she said finally. "Hannah Reed, the baby's Lucy." She swallowed hard. "We were with a wagon train, headed to Oregon. I got sick, fever. Her voice broke. "They left us. Said they couldn't wait. Said we'd slow them down and they'd all die if they waited." Elias felt something cold settle in his stomach. They left a sick woman and a baby? In winter? Not everyone agreed. Hannah's hands twisted in the blankets. But the man leading, he said we'd catch up when I was better. He left some food, a blanket. Said there was a town not far. Her laugh was bitter, broken. There wasn't, or I couldn't find it. I walked for 2 days, I think, maybe 3. It all... It all runs together. 2 days, Elias repeated, trying to keep the anger out of his voice. 2 days in this cold, with a baby. It was a miracle they'd survived even one. How did you find the barn? I didn't. I saw the shape of it against the snow. I thought maybe it was a house, maybe someone would help. But when I got close, I realized it was a barn. I thought. She stopped, and he saw her throat work as she swallowed. I thought at least we'd be out of the wind. At least when they found us, we'd be together. The matter-of-fact way she said it, when they found us, not if, told Elias everything he needed to know about how close to giving up she'd been. How close they'd both come to becoming just two more casualties of a Montana winter found in the spring thaw. Well, he said, and his voice came out rougher than he intended. You made it. You're both alive. That's what matters. Hannah's eyes found her baby again, and Elias saw the love there, fierce and protective and absolute. The kind of love that kept you walking through a blizzard when every step felt like dying. The kind of love he'd once known and thought he'd never feel again. Can I? Hannah started to sit up again, reaching toward the drawer. Can I hold her? You should probably eat something first. Get your strength back. She's sleeping sound. But even as he said it, Elias was moving the drawer closer because he recognized the need in Hannah's voice. It wasn't about strength or logic. It was about the bone-deep requirement to touch your child, to confirm they were real and alive and safe. He helped her sit up. She was weak, shaking with the effort, and placed Lucy in her arms. Hannah cradled the baby like she was made of spun glass, and Lucy stirred but didn't wake, just made a small sound of contentment and nestled closer to her mother. Hi, sweet girl, Hannah whispered, and her voice broke. Mama's here, Mama's here. Elias turned away, giving them privacy, using the excuse of stoking the fire. He heard Hannah crying softly, heard her murmuring to the baby, and he focused very hard on the fire and not on the memory of Sarah doing the same thing with Emma, back when he'd believed the world was fundamentally good and life fundamentally fair. When he turned back, Hannah had composed herself, though her eyes were red. Lucy was awake now, staring up at her mother with that serious baby expression, and Hannah was smiling through tears. She's heavier, Hannah said, looking up at Elias. She feels heavier. What did you feed her? Cow's milk, warmed. It's not ideal, but it's what I had. And she took it? She was hungry enough to take anything, I think. Hannah nodded, then looked around the cabin properly for the first time. He saw her taking in the details, the neatness, the emptiness, the lack of any personal touches that would suggest a family lived here. No pictures on the walls, no trinkets on the mantel except that clock. Nothing to suggest anyone but a solitary man making his way through winter. You live alone, she said. It wasn't a question. I do. No wife? Elias felt the old familiar tightness in his chest. I did. Once. She died. 15 years ago. I'm sorry. And she sounded like she meant it. Children? One. She died too. The words came out flat, factual. He'd had 15 years to practice saying them without feeling. He wasn't sure if that was a blessing or a curse. Hannah's arms tightened around Lucy. I'm sorry, she said again, softer this time. Elias just nodded. He didn't talk about Sarah and Emma, didn't think about them if he could help it, and he certainly didn't discuss them with strangers, no matter how they'd come to be in his cabin. You should eat, he said, changing the subject. Get your strength back, I'll make something. You don't have to. You're in no condition to be making demands, Mrs. Reed. You eat what I give you and rest. Doctor's orders. You're not a doctor. No, but I've kept enough cattle alive through winter to know how to treat hypothermia. The principle's the same. He thought he saw a ghost of a smile touch her lips. You're comparing me to a cow? A cow would have had better sense than to be walking through a blizzard with a baby. That definitely was a smile, small and fleeting, but there. Fair point, Mr. Grant. Elias, he said, if you're going to be sleeping in my cabin and eating my food, you might as well use my given name. Hannah, she said in return, though I suppose you already knew that. He made stew, simple, just beef and vegetables, and the last of the bread from 2 days ago, but hot and filling. Hannah ate like she was starving, which she probably was, holding Lucy in one arm and the bowl in the other. The baby watched the proceedings with interest, tracking the spoon from bowl to mouth with her dark eyes. "She's beautiful," Elias said without thinking, and then immediately regretted it when Hannah looked up sharply. But her expression softened when she saw he meant the baby, not her. "She is," Hannah agreed, smoothing Lucy's dark hair. "She looks like her father, same eyes, same serious expression." A pause, heavy with things unsaid. "He died. Before she was born." "I'm sorry." "Cholera. Took half the town. He was a good man, kind. We were going to Oregon to start fresh, away from the memories. I decided to go anyway after he died. Seemed like what he would have wanted." She looked down at Lucy. "Stupid, probably. A pregnant woman traveling cross-country. But I didn't have anything left where we were. No family, no prospects. Just debts and sympathy. And a future that looked pretty bleak." Elias understood that feeling. The need to run from what hurt, even when you knew you couldn't outrun grief. "Oregon's a long way from here." "I'm aware." Her voice was dry. "Farther now than when I started, seems like." "What will you do? The wagon train?" "Is gone." Hannah said it with finality. "They made their choice. I'm not fool enough to think they'll come back for us, or that I could catch them even if I wanted to. They're probably 2 weeks ahead by now, maybe more." "The town, then. Redemption. It's only 12 miles south. When the road's clear, I could take you—" "And do what?" Hannah looked at him squarely. "I have no money, Mr. Grant." "Elias, I spent everything I had on that wagon train passage. I have no skills beyond cooking and sewing and the kind of work that doesn't pay enough to keep a baby fed. I've got no family to wire, no one to take me in." Her voice didn't waver, but he heard the fear underneath it. "I'm 24 years old, widowed, with an infant, and no prospects. In any town I go to, I'll end up in a laundry or worse, and Lucy will end up in an orphanage or with strangers, and I'd rather—" She stopped, clamped her mouth shut, but Elias heard what she hadn't said. "I'd rather die." "You'll stay here," he heard himself say. "Until spring anyway. Roads won't be passable for another 2-3 months. By then you'll have your strength back. You can decide what to do from there." Hannah stared at him. "I can't impose—" "You're not imposing, I'm offering. You don't know me. I could be a thief, a murderer. You nearly died to keep your baby alive. That tells me what I need to know about your character. People will talk. A man and a woman alone. Let them talk. Nearest neighbor is 6 miles. Unless you plan on hiking over there to introduce yourself, I don't see how anyone would know." Hannah was quiet for a long moment, studying him with those dark eyes. And Elias had the uncomfortable feeling she was seeing more than he wanted her to, looking past the gruff exterior to the lonely man underneath, the one who'd been alone too long and was maybe, just maybe, tired of it. "Why?" she asked finally. "Why would you do this for strangers?" Elias looked at the fire, at the baby in Hannah's arms, at the snow still falling past his window. Why? Because 15 years ago, he'd stayed too long at a card game and come home to find his family dead. Because he'd spent every day since wondering if he could have saved them if he'd been there. Because tonight, he'd had a second chance to save someone, and he'd taken it, and now they were alive and warm, and he wasn't going to throw them back into the cold to die. Because he was tired of living in a house that felt like a tomb. Because it's Christmas, he said finally, which was true enough, though not the whole truth. And because you're here, and I've got room, and turning you out would make me the kind of man I don't want to be. Hannah looked down at Lucy, who had fallen asleep again in her arms, milk-drunk and content. When she looked back up at Elias, there were tears in her eyes again, but she was smiling. "Okay," she said softly. "Okay. Thank you. We'll stay until spring." Elias nodded, not trusting himself to speak, wondering what the hell he'd just agreed to. 3 months. That's all it would be. 3 months, and then she'd leave, and his life would go back to the careful, controlled emptiness he'd built. 3 months. It seemed like nothing. It seemed like everything. Outside, the storm finally began to ease. The wind died from a scream to a whisper. The snow kept falling, but gentler now, softer, covering the world in white silence. and inside the cabin, Elias Grant stoked the fire and watched two strangers sleep, and felt the first crack in the ice around his heart. He told himself it meant nothing. He told himself 3 months would pass quickly. He told himself he'd be fine when they left. He was wrong about all of it. The first morning broke cold and clear, the storm having finally exhausted itself sometime before dawn. Elias woke in his chair by the fire, his neck stiff and his back complaining, to find pale sunlight streaming through the frost-covered windows and the sound of a baby fussing softly. Hannah was already awake, sitting up on the makeshift bed he'd arranged for her on the floor, trying to soothe Lucy, who was working herself up to a proper cry. She looked better than she had the night before, color in her cheeks, awareness in her eyes, but exhausted in a way that spoke of interrupted sleep and worry that didn't stop just because the sun came up. "She's hungry," Hannah said, noticing he was awake. There was apology in her voice, as if the baby's needs were an imposition. "I'll warm some milk." Elias stood, his joints protesting, and moved to the stove. The cabin was cold. The fire had burned down to embers, and he built it back up while the milk heated, aware of Hannah watching him with that careful wariness that hadn't fully left her eyes. Lucy's fussing escalated to crying, and Hannah tried to comfort her, rocking her, murmuring soft words that did nothing to stem the hungry wails. Elias had forgotten how loud babies could be, how their cries seemed designed by nature to be impossible to ignore. The sound went straight through him, touching places he'd thought long frozen. "Here!" He brought the milk over, tested on his wrist again, and handed Hannah the cloth he'd used the night before. She took it gratefully and offered it to Lucy, who latched on with desperate enthusiasm, her cries cutting off instantly. Silence fell, broken only by the soft sounds of the baby feeding and the crackle of the fire. Hannah's shoulders sagged with relief, and Elias saw how thin she was, how the nightgown she wore, one of his, far too large, hung on a frame that had lost too much weight too fast. "When did you last eat?" he asked. "Before last night, I mean." Hannah thought about it, her brow furrowing. "I don't know, 2 days? 3? I had some dried meat the wagon train left, but I gave most of it to Lucy. Chewed it soft and let her have it. She needed it more." Elias felt that cold anger again, the kind that burned slow and steady. "I'll make breakfast. A real one. You need to get your strength back." "You don't have to." "Stop saying that." His voice came out sharper than he intended, and he saw Hannah flinch. He softened his tone. "You're recovering from hypothermia and God knows how long without proper food. Lucy needs you healthy, so you'll eat what I make and you'll rest, and that's the end of it." He expected an argument, but Hannah just nodded, too tired to fight. "Thank you," she said quietly. Elias cooked eggs and bacon, fried potatoes, fresh bread toasted over the stove. More food than he usually made for himself, more than he'd cooked in this cabin since Sarah died. The smells filled the small space, rich and homey, and he caught himself wondering what it would be like to cook like this every morning, to have someone to cook for. He shut that thought down quickly. Hannah ate like she was starving, which she was. She tried to pace herself, to eat slowly, but Elias could see the effort it took. Lucy, fed and content, lay in her lap watching everything with those serious dark eyes. "She's very quiet," Elias observed. "The baby. Most infants cry more." She learned early that crying doesn't always bring help. Hannah's voice was matter-of-fact, but Elias heard the pain underneath. On the wagon train, people complained about the noise, said it bothered them. I tried to keep her quiet. She looked down at Lucy. "She's a good girl, better than I deserve." "You kept her alive through a Montana winter with nothing but determination. I'd say that makes you exactly what she deserves." Hannah's eyes met his, and he saw surprise there, as if kindness was something she'd stopped expecting from the world. "You're a good man, Elias Grant." "Don't be too sure about that." "I'm sure enough." After breakfast, Elias showed Hannah where things were. The washroom, such as it was, the clothes that might fit her if she rolled up the sleeves and cinched the waist, the spare blankets. The cabin was small, just 2 rooms really. The main room that served as kitchen and living space, and the bedroom. There was a door he kept closed, but he didn't mention it, and Hannah didn't ask. "You'll take the bedroom," he said. "I'll sleep out here." "I can't take your bed. You have a baby. You need a real bed, not a pile of blankets on the floor. It's not up for discussion." Hannah looked like she wanted to argue, but Lucy chose that moment to spit up on herself, and the practical concerns of motherhood took precedence over pride. Elias showed her where the washing things were, then excused himself to check on the animals. Outside, the world was transformed. The storm had left nearly 2 feet of new snow, sculpting everything into soft white shapes that sparkled in the morning sun. The sky was that particular shade of blue you only got after a blizzard, clear and cold and endless. Beautiful, if you had the luxury of appreciating beauty when you didn't have to fight it to survive. The animals were fine, hungry, and thirsty, but none the worse for wear. Elias fed them, broke the ice on the water troughs, mucked out stalls. Normal work, familiar work, the kind of thing he could do without thinking, but his mind wasn't on the work. It was on the woman in his cabin. He didn't know what he'd been thinking, offering to let her stay. 3 months was a long time. A long time to have someone in his space, disrupting his routines, forcing him to be aware of another human being. He'd gotten used to silence, to solitude, to days that passed in predictable sameness. Now he'd invited chaos in the form of a woman and a baby, and some part of him, the part that had built walls around his heart and locked the nursery door, was screaming at him to fix this, to send them to town, to get back to the safety of being alone. But he thought about Hannah's thin frame, about Lucy's serious eyes, about the fact that they'd been abandoned to die by people who should have protected them. And he knew he couldn't do it, couldn't send them away. Not yet. Maybe not ever. The thought terrified him. He stayed in the barn longer than necessary, putting off going back inside. But eventually the work was done, and there was no more excuse to hide. He trudged through the snow back to the cabin, stomping his boots on the porch to knock off the worst of it. When he opened the door, he stopped. The cabin was different, not in any big way, but in 100 small ones. A blanket folded neatly on the back of the chair, dishes washed and drying by the sink, the floor swept, and Hannah, wearing a pair of his old work pants rolled up at the ankles and a flannel shirt that swallowed her, standing at the stove stirring something that smelled like soup. "You should be resting," Elias said. Hannah turned, and he saw that she'd washed her hair, braided it back. Without the dirt and exhaustion obscuring her features, he could see she was prettier than he'd first thought. Not beautiful in a way that would stop traffic, but there was something in her face, a strength, a determination, that made her striking. "I've been resting all morning," she said. "I'm not used to sitting idle, and you've been generous enough already without me being a burden." "You're not. I found vegetables in your cold box," she continued, talking over his objection. "And some beef bones. I made soup. It's not much, but you don't need to earn your keep, Hannah." She turned back to the stove, her shoulders tight. "Yes, I do. I won't be a charity case. If I'm staying here, I'm contributing. That's how it works." Elias recognized the pride in her voice, the need to maintain dignity when everything else had been stripped away. He understood it because he'd felt it himself after Sarah and Emma died and people had tried to help him, to take care of him. The well-meaning neighbors bringing casseroles and sympathy he didn't want. He'd hated it, hated feeling weak, hated being the object of pity. "All right," he said finally, "but you're still recovering. Take it easy." Hannah nodded, not looking at him, and Elias let it drop. He hung up his coat, washed his hands, and found himself with nothing to do. His cabin, his routine, his carefully structured day, all of it disrupted by the presence of someone else. Lucy was asleep in the drawer-turned cradle, her small chest rising and falling steadily. Elias watched her for a moment, this tiny person who'd come into his life on a storm wind. 6 months old, Hannah had said, the same age Emma had been when the fever took her. He'd tried so hard not to remember what that was like, the weight of a baby in his arms, the trust in their eyes, the terrifying responsibility of keeping something so fragile alive. "She likes you," Hannah said, and Elias looked up to find her watching him. "Lucy, she doesn't usually take to strangers, but she's comfortable with you, I can tell." "I haven't done much." "You saved her life. That's something." The soup was good, rich and warming, better than anything Elias had made in years. They ate in a silence that wasn't quite comfortable but wasn't hostile either. Lucy woke halfway through and demanded attention, and Elias found himself watching Hannah tend to her daughter, with the kind of casual competence that came from months of practice. The way she checked the diaper, cleaned Lucy up, talked to her in that sing-song voice mothers used. It was familiar and painful and oddly comforting all at once. The days that followed developed a rhythm. Elias would wake early, build up the fire, tend the animals. Hannah would make breakfast, clean the cabin, care for Lucy. They'd eat lunch together, usually in silence. Afternoons Elias spent on ranch work, mending fences, chopping wood, all the endless maintenance a Montana winter required. Evenings they'd share dinner, and then Hannah would put Lucy to bed while Elias read or worked on small repairs. It was domestic, normal, the kind of life Elias had given up on ever having again, and it scared the hell out of him. But it was also nice. Coming in from the cold to find the cabin warm and smelling of whatever Hannah had cooked. Hearing Lucy's gurgles and babbles, her delighted shrieks when something amused her, having someone to talk to, even if the conversations were mostly practical. Where's the extra lamp oil? I noticed the roof is leaking above the bedroom. We're low on flour. Small things. Daily things. The building blocks of a life shared. One evening, about 2 weeks after Hannah and Lucy had arrived, Elias came in from evening chores to find Hannah singing. Just humming, really, a tune he didn't recognize while she worked at mending one of his shirts. Lucy was on a blanket on the floor, playing with a wooden spoon and making happy nonsense sounds. Hannah looked up when he entered and the humming stopped, self-conscious. Sorry, I didn't realize I was doing it. Don't stop on my account. She smiled small and quick and went back to her mending. But she didn't start humming again, and Elias felt the loss of it. He washed up and sat down to his own work, a bridle that needed fixing, and for a while they worked in companionable silence. Lucy babbled to herself, creating elaborate conversations in baby language that seemed to make perfect sense to her if no one else. She's going to start crawling soon, Hannah said suddenly. Lucy, she's almost there. I can see her figuring it out, working up the courage. You'll have your hands full then. I know. My mother always said once they're mobile, you never sit down again. Hannah's hand stilled on the mending, and her voice went soft. She died when I was 12. Fever, like your wife. I took care of my father after that, kept house for him until he passed 3 years ago. That's when I met Thomas, Lucy's father. It was the most she'd volunteered about her past, and Elias found himself curious despite himself. What was he like? Kind, gentle. He worked as a clerk, nothing exciting, but he was steady. Safe. She smiled at the memory. He used to read to me in the evenings, poetry mostly. He loved poetry. Used to say the world needed more beauty in it, and words were the cheapest way to make it. Sounds like a good man. He was. Her voice broke slightly. He would have loved her so much. Lucy? He was so excited when I told him I was pregnant. Started making plans, building a cradle, picking out names. He died 2 months before she was born. Never got to meet her. I'm sorry. Hannah looked at him, and there was understanding in her eyes. You know what it's like to lose them, your wife and daughter. It wasn't a question, but Elias nodded anyway. Sarah and Emma, 15 years ago next month. Does it get easier? The question he'd been asking himself for 15 years. No, he said honestly. It gets different. The sharp edges wear down, but the hole never fills in. You just learn to walk around it. That's what I'm afraid of. Hannah's voice was barely a whisper. That I'll wake up one day and realize I've built my whole life around avoiding the pain. That I'll be so busy walking around the hole that I forget how to actually live. Elias felt something twist in his chest, recognition sharp as a knife, because that's exactly what he'd done. Built his life around absence, around avoiding anything that might make him feel. Locked the nursery door and thrown away the key, told himself it was survival when really it was just slow dying. Don't be like me, he said, and was surprised by the roughness in his voice. Don't lock yourself away. Lucy needs more than that. What did Emma need? The question hit him like a physical blow. He opened his mouth to answer, to say something, anything, but no words came. Because he didn't know, couldn't remember. 15 years of trying not to think about her, and he'd succeeded so well that her face was blurry now, her laugh fading. He could remember the facts. 2 years old, dark hair like her mother, smile that lit up the room. But the living, breathing reality of her was gone. He'd tried so hard to escape the pain that he'd lost even the memories. "I should check the barn," he said abruptly, standing up. "Make sure everything's secure." Elias, but he was already grabbing his coat, already heading for the door, fleeing the question and the woman who'd asked it, and the uncomfortable truth it had forced him to see. He heard Hannah call his name again, but he didn't stop, couldn't stop, just pushed out into the cold night air. The barn was fine, of course. He'd checked it an hour ago. But he went through the motions anyway, checking locks that didn't need checking, straightening tools that were already straight, anything to avoid going back inside and facing what Hannah had made him realize. He'd thought he was surviving, thought he was being strong, keeping it together, managing his grief in a healthy way. But really, he'd just been hiding. He sat down on a hay bale and put his head in his hands, and for the first time in years, let himself actually remember. Not the death. He'd remembered that part plenty, had lived it over and over in nightmares and waking moments alike. But the life, the before. Emma at 6 months, laughing at nothing. Emma at 1 year, taking her first wobbling steps. Emma at 18 months, saying dada for the first time. Emma at 2, singing nonsense songs and demanding stories and asking why about everything. Sarah, pregnant with their second child, glowing with joy and plans for the future. Sarah making breakfast while Emma helped by making a mess with the eggs. Sarah reading in the evening while Emma played at her feet. The life they'd had, the life he'd forgotten in his hurry to forget the pain. He didn't know how long he sat there, lost in memories that hurt and healed in equal measure, long enough that his breath frosted the air around him, long enough that his fingers went numb with cold. When he finally went back inside, Hannah was sitting by the fire, Lucy asleep in her arms. She looked up when he entered, and he saw that she'd been crying. Her eyes were red, her cheeks wet. "I'm sorry," she said immediately. "I shouldn't have pushed. It's not my business. You were right to push." Elias sat down across from her, suddenly exhausted. "I needed to hear it, even if I didn't want to." They sat in silence for a while, the fire crackling between them. Lucy snuffled in her sleep, and Hannah adjusted her hold automatically, soothing her without waking. "Tell me about them," Hannah said softly. "Sarah and Emma, if you want to." And to his surprise, Elias found that he did want to. For the first time in 15 years, he wanted to remember out loud, to make them real again in words. So he told her about how he and Sarah had met at a barn dance when he was 22 and she was 19, how she'd stepped on his feet during the first dance and laughed about it instead of apologizing, how they'd married 6 months later and built this cabin together, just the two of them and their dreams. He told her about Emma, born on a spring morning, coming into the world screaming and perfect, how Sarah had cried with joy, how he'd held his daughter for the first time and understood what it meant to be terrified and elated all at once. He told her about the little things, Emma's favorite toy, a cloth doll Sarah had sewn, the way Sarah hummed while she cooked, never the same tune twice, how Emma would fall asleep only if he rocked her, never for Sarah, which used to make his wife laugh and pretend to be jealous. He told her about the night he'd stayed too long at the neighbor's place, how he'd come home to find them both burning with fever, how he'd ridden through a storm for the doctor, but by the time they got back it was too late. "I've told myself for 15 years that there was nothing I could have done," Elias said, his voice rough. "The doctor said the fever was too far advanced, that even if I'd been home it wouldn't have mattered. But I don't know, I'll never know, and that's the part that kills me." Hannah was quiet for a long moment. "You know what Thomas said to me right before he died?" Elias shook his head. He said, "Take care of our girl." Not Lucy. He didn't know if the baby was a boy or a girl yet, just our girl. And then he was gone. She looked down at Lucy. "I spent months after he died drowning in guilt, thinking about all the things I should have said, should have done, wishing I'd made him stay home that day instead of going to work, wishing I'd told him one more time that I loved him. It's not the same. It's exactly the same. You think if you'd been there, you could have saved them. I think if I'd kept him home, the cholera wouldn't have taken him. But we don't know. We can't know. The only thing we can do is decide whether we're going to let the guilt destroy us or whether we're going to honor their memory by actually living." Elias looked at her, This young woman who'd lost her husband and nearly died in a snowstorm and still found the strength to wake up every morning and take care of her baby. Who'd walked for days through freezing cold because giving up meant giving up on Lucy. Who was sitting here now, sharing his grief instead of running from it. "How do you do it?" he asked. "How do you keep going?" Hannah smiled, sad but real. I look at her. She nodded down at Lucy, and I realize I don't have a choice. She needs me. So I get up. I put one foot in front of the other. Some days that's all I can manage. But it's enough. They talked until late, sharing stories and silences in equal measure. Hannah told him about growing up in Kansas, about learning to cook from her mother, about her father's slow decline after his wife died. Elias told her about building the ranch with his father, about his mother's death when he was 17, about the dreams he and Sarah had for expanding the herd. It was the most Elias had talked in years, and it felt like lancing a wound, painful but necessary, letting out poison that had been festering too long. Finally, well past midnight, Hannah stood with Lucy in her arms. I should put her down, get some sleep. Hannah? Elias stood too, suddenly needing to say something he wasn't sure how to articulate. Thank you, for tonight, for listening. Thank you for talking, for trusting me with their memory. She turned to go to the bedroom, then paused. Elias, you're not a bad man for surviving. You're not betraying them by moving forward. They wouldn't want you to spend your life locked in grief. After she'd gone, Elias sat by the dying fire and thought about her words. About Sarah, who'd been full of life and laughter and love. About Emma, who'd found joy in everything. Would they want him to live like this? Alone in a house that felt like a mausoleum, going through the motions of life without actually living? He knew the answer. Had always known it, if he was honest. The next morning, Elias woke to the sound of Lucy crying and Hannah's soft voice soothing her. He lay still for a moment, listening, letting himself feel the comfort of not being alone. Then he got up and built the fire and started coffee, falling into the routine that had become familiar over the past 2 weeks. Hannah emerged from the bedroom looking tired but determined. She's teething, she said by way of explanation. Didn't sleep well. I could take her for a while, if you want to rest. Hannah looked surprised. You don't have to. I know, but I'm offering. There was a moment of hesitation, that wariness he'd come to recognize as Hannah's default setting with people, the expectation that offers of help came with strings attached. But then she nodded and handed Lucy over. The baby was fussy, gnawing on her fist and whimpering. Elias held her awkwardly at first. It had been so long, but the old instincts came back. He walked with her, bounced her gently, hummed tunelessly the way he remembered doing with Emma. Lucy stopped crying and looked at him with those serious eyes, considering whether to trust this strange comfort or demand her mother back. After a moment, she decided to trust. She laid her head against his chest and stuck her thumb in her mouth, her small body relaxing against him. Something in Elias's chest cracked open. Not the walls coming down completely, but definitely a fissure letting light through. He looked up to find Hannah watching from the bedroom doorway, an expression on her face he couldn't quite read. You're good with her. Had some practice, long time ago. It shows. The weeks passed and winter settled in hard. There were days when the cold was so fierce that Elias didn't bother with anything beyond feeding the animals and getting back inside. Days when the wind howled and the snow fell sideways and the cabin felt like the only warm spot in a frozen world. But inside things were warming in other ways. Hannah learned Elias's routines and he learned hers, and they found a way to orbit around each other without constant collision. She cooked meals that were better than anything he'd eaten in years. He made sure there was always firewood cut and stacked, water drawn from the well before it froze, small acts of care that added up to something bigger. Lucy thrived. She'd been so quiet when she first arrived, so still, but warmth and food and safety brought out the baby she was meant to be. She babbled constantly now, conducting elaborate conversations with herself in a language only she understood. She'd figured out how to roll over and was working on sitting up, getting closer every day. And she laughed, deep belly laughs that seemed too big for her small body, usually at things that weren't remotely funny, but delighted her nonetheless. Elias found himself doing things to make her laugh, making faces, playing peekaboo, All the silly things he'd done with Emma and thought he'd never do again. One afternoon in early February, Hannah was preparing vegetables for stew while Lucy played on a blanket near the fire. Elias was at the table, going over his accounts, when he heard Hannah say, "Elias, look." He glanced up. Hannah was pointing at Lucy, who had pushed herself up onto her hands and knees and was rocking back and forth, her face scrunched up with concentration. "She's going to do it," Hannah breathed. They watched, both holding still as if any movement might break the spell. Lucy rocked forward, then back, building momentum. Then, with a look of fierce determination, she lunged forward, moving one hand, then one knee, one crawl, then another. Then she lost her balance and tumbled sideways, landing on her back with a surprised expression. For a moment, silence. Then Lucy's face crumpled, and she started to cry. Hannah was there in an instant, scooping her up. "It's okay, sweet girl. You did it. You crawled. You're such a smart, brave girl." The praise worked better than comfort. Lucy stopped crying and looked at her mother with an expression that clearly said, "Did you see what I just did?" "I saw," Hannah laughed, pressing kisses to her daughter's head. "I saw. You were amazing." Elias felt that crack in his chest widen a little more. He'd missed this with Emma. She'd learned to crawl while he was out mending fence, and Sarah had told him about it when he came home. He'd felt cheated then, and now he realized what a gift it was to witness these moments. The first crawl, the first laugh, all the ordinary miracles that made up a life. "She'll be everywhere now," he said, and Hannah turned to him with a smile so bright it hurt to look at. "I know. I should probably be worried, but I'm so proud of her." "You should be. She's a fighter, like her mother." Hannah's smile softened into something else, something that made Elias's pulse quicken in a way that had nothing to do with exertion. "Takes one to know one," she said quietly. The moment stretched between them, heavy with things neither was ready to name. Then Lucy squirmed, demanding to be put down so she could try this new skill again, and the moment passed. But it had been there, and both of them knew it. That night, after Hannah had put Lucy to bed, she came back out to find Elias standing in front of the closed door he'd never explained. "What's in there?" she asked softly. Elias's hand was on the doorknob, had been for the past 5 minutes. "The nursery, Emma's room. I haven't opened it since—" His voice failed him. Hannah came to stand beside him. She didn't touch him, didn't push, just stood there in silent support. "Sarah decorated it while she was pregnant," Elias continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "Yellow curtains, a rocking chair her mother gave us. The cradle I built." His hand tightened on the knob. "After they died, I closed the door, locked it, told myself I'd deal with it later. That was 15 years ago." "You don't have to open it now." "I know, but I think—" He stopped, then started again. "I think maybe it's time." The lock was stiff from years of disuse, but it turned. The door swung open with a creak that seemed too loud in the quiet cabin. 15 years of dust, 15 years of air that hadn't circulated. But underneath the neglect, the room was exactly as Sarah had left it. The yellow curtains, faded now, but still cheerful. The rocking chair in the corner. The cradle, still holding the blanket Sarah had knitted. Elias stood in the doorway, unable to move forward or back, caught between past and present. He felt Hannah's hand slip into his, warm and solid and real. "Tell me about it," she said. "Tell me what she loved." So he did. He stepped into the room he'd abandoned and told Hannah how Emma had loved that mobile hanging over the cradle, would watch it spin for hours. How she'd refused to sleep anywhere but in Sarah's arms for the first 3 months. How the yellow curtains had been Sarah's idea because she said every baby deserved to wake up to sunshine. And as he talked, the room stopped being a shrine to death and became again what it was meant to be, a place for new life. They didn't stay long. It was enough just to have opened the door, to have let light and air in after all this time. But as they left, Elias didn't close the door behind him, didn't lock it, left it open. Just a crack. But it was a start. March came in like the lion it was supposed to be, bringing warmer days but unreliable weather that could turn from sunshine to blizzard in an hour. The snow began to melt in patches, revealing brown earth that hadn't seen daylight in months. The roads, impassable for weeks, started to clear. And with the clearing roads came the reality that Hannah and Elias had both been avoiding. Spring was coming, and with spring came decisions. Elias noticed Hannah growing quieter as the days lengthened. She still cooked, still cleaned, still cared for Lucy with the same devoted attention. But there was a distance in her eyes now, a sadness that hadn't been there before. He'd catch her staring out the window at the melting snow, her expression unreadable, and he'd know she was thinking about leaving. He should bring it up, should talk about what came next, make plans, be practical. But every time he opened his mouth to start the conversation, the words died in his throat. Because talking about it meant acknowledging that this, the warmth, the companionship, the feeling of home he'd rediscovered, had an expiration date. 3 months. That's what he'd offered. 3 months had come and gone, and he hadn't said a word about her leaving because saying it would make it real. One morning, in mid-March, Elias came in from checking the animals to find Hannah packing. Not obviously, just a few things gathered on the bed, Lucy's clothes folded in a neat pile. But the intent was clear. "Roads are clearing," she said without looking at him. Her voice was carefully neutral. "I saw when I went to draw water, the main path to town is nearly passable." Elias stood in the doorway, snow melting off his boots, feeling like the floor had dropped out from under him. "Hannah, you've been more than generous, Elias. More than anyone had a right to expect. But we can't impose on you forever." She was folding a small blanket, her hands moving with precise, controlled motions. "I've been thinking. There's a boarding house in Redemption. I could work there maybe, cleaning rooms, helping in the kitchen. It would be enough to keep us fed, and Lucy could stay with me while I worked." "You don't have to." "I do." Now she did look at him, and her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I do have to. I can't stay here living off your charity, taking advantage of your kindness. It's not right. It's not fair to you." "What if I want you to stay?" The words hung in the air between them, too big and too honest. Hannah's hands stilled on the blanket. Lucy, playing on the floor, babbled something that sounded like a question. "You don't mean that," Hannah said finally. "You're just being kind. You've built a good life here, Elias, a quiet life. You don't need us disrupting it." "What if I'm tired of quiet?" Elias took a step into the room, his heart pounding. "What if the last 3 months have been the first time in 15 years I've actually felt alive instead of just existing?" Hannah shook her head, but he saw the longing in her eyes. "You'll feel different when we're gone. You'll have your peace back, your routine. You'll realize this was just a temporary thing, a interruption." "Is that what you think? That you're an interruption? Aren't we?" Elias wanted to tell her no, tell her that she and Lucy had brought light back into a house that had been dark too long, that he woke up every morning looking forward to the day instead of dreading it, that somewhere along the way, between the shared meals and quiet conversations and ordinary moments of domesticity, this had stopped being charity and started being something else entirely. But the words wouldn't come. 15 years of silence, of keeping his feelings locked down tight, couldn't be undone in a single conversation. So instead he just stood there, watching Hannah fold baby clothes and build walls between them, brick by careful brick. "When?" he asked finally. "Few days, maybe a week, when the roads are fully clear." Hannah's voice was steady, but her hands shook slightly as she worked. "I'll need to borrow the wagon. I'll send payment once I'm settled, once I've earned—" "Keep the wagon." "Elias, keep it. I've got 2. Consider it payment for all the cooking and cleaning you've done." It was a lie, and they both knew it, but Hannah nodded, accepting the fiction because it was easier than the truth. "Thank you." The next few days were torture. Hannah prepared for departure with quiet efficiency, while Elias tried to figure out how to ask her to stay without sounding desperate or presumptuous. Lucy, blissfully unaware of the tension, achieved new milestones daily. She could sit up on her own now, could crawl from one end of the cabin to the other. She'd even started pulling herself up on furniture, standing on wobbly legs with a look of fierce concentration that reminded Elias painfully of Hannah. He caught himself memorizing details. The way Hannah hummed while she cooked, the exact shade of her eyes in firelight, the sound of Lucy's laugh. All the small things he'd taken for granted, thinking he had time. On the morning Hannah had designated for departure, Elias woke before dawn and loaded the wagon. supplies for the journey, blankets to keep them warm, food to last until Hannah found work. He checked the wheels, the axles, made sure everything was in working order. Told himself he was being practical when really he was just procrastinating. The sun was up by the time he finished. Hannah was in the cabin, dressing Lucy in her warmest clothes. The baby was fussy, fighting the process the way she always did, and Hannah's patience was clearly wearing thin. "Come on, sweet girl. I know you don't like it, but it's cold out. You need your coat." Lucy responded by bursting into tears, arching her back in protest. It was so normal, so ordinary, that for a moment Elias could pretend this was just another day, that they weren't about to leave, that everything wasn't about to change. Hannah finally got Lucy into her coat and turned to find Elias watching from the doorway. "Wagon ready?" "Yeah." "Then I guess," her voice caught. "I guess it's time." They stood there for a moment, neither moving. Outside, one of the horses whinnied, impatient. The clock on the mantel ticked. Lucy's tears had subsided to sniffles. "Hannah," Elias started, but she shook her head. "Don't, please. If you say something kind, I'll—" She stopped, blinking hard. "Let's just go. Clean break." She picked up her small bag of belongings in one hand and Lucy in the other. Walked to the door. Elias moved aside to let her pass, and their shoulders brushed. He felt the contact like electricity. The morning was cold but clear, the kind of day that promised spring, even if winter wasn't quite done yet. Elias helped Hannah into the wagon seat, then handed Lucy up to her. The baby looked around with wide eyes, confused by this change in routine. 12 miles south," Elias said, his voice rough. "Stay on the main road. You'll see the church steeple before you see the town. Can't miss it." "I know, you told me." Hannah adjusted Lucy in her lap, not meeting his eyes. "Thank you, Elias. For everything. I'll never forget—" Lucy's scream cut her off. Not a cry of protest or discomfort, a scream of pain, high and terrible, that turned both their heads instantly. The baby was rigid in Hannah's arms, her small face contorted, her body shaking. "Lucy!" Hannah's voice was pure panic. "Lucy, what's wrong? Baby, what—" Another scream, and then Lucy went limp. Her eyes rolled back. Her skin, which had been pink with health moments before, went pale and waxy. "No," Hannah whispered. "No, no, no!" Elias was moving before conscious thought, reaching up to take the baby from Hannah's arms. Lucy's skin was burning, fever, sudden and severe, the kind that could kill in hours if left untreated. "Get down," he ordered. "Get down now. We're not going anywhere." "But now, Hannah!" She scrambled down, and Elias was already striding back to the cabin, Lucy limp in his arms. Behind him, he heard Hannah's footsteps, heard her ragged breathing that might have been sobs. He kicked the door open and went straight to the bedroom, laying Lucy on the bed. The baby's eyes were half closed, unfocused. Her breathing was rapid and shallow. When Elias pressed his hand to her forehead, the heat was shocking. "What's happening?" Hannah was beside him, her hands hovering over her daughter, afraid to touch, afraid not to. "She was fine this morning. She was fine." "Fever. Came on fast." Elias was already moving, his mind clicking through everything he knew about treating sick children. Not much, not enough, but more than nothing. "We need to cool her down, get her temperature under control." "How? What do we—" "Water. Cool, not cold. Cloths." He was stripping off Lucy's coat, her dress, down to just her diaper. "And we need medicine. I've got willow bark tea. That'll help with the fever." Hannah ran for the water while Elias prepared the tea, his hands surprisingly steady despite the fear clawing at his chest. Lucy whimpered but didn't cry, didn't have the strength for it. Her small body was slack, unresponsive. This was how it had started with Emma, the sudden fever, the rapid decline. He'd left for help and come back to find her already gone. The memory was so vivid it nearly knocked him to his knees. But Hannah needed him, Lucy needed him. So he pushed the memory down and focused on what was in front of him. Hannah came back with a basin of water and clean cloths. Together they worked to cool Lucy's burning skin, wiping her down gently while Elias tried to get some of the willow bark tea into her. Most of it dribbled out. She was too weak to swallow properly. But some went down. It was the best they could do. "Should I go for the doctor?" Hannah asked. Her face was white, her hands shaking. I could ride 12 miles there and 12 back. Even if you rode hard, that's 5 hours minimum. We can't wait that long. Elias met her eyes. We handle this ourselves, together. The day passed in a blur of fear and desperate activity. They took turns cooling Lucy with wet cloths, trying to get medicine into her, monitoring her breathing. The fever spiked higher, and Lucy began to seize, her small body convulsing while Hannah held her and sobbed, and Elias felt helpless rage at his own inability to fix this. She's dying, Hannah whispered after the seizure passed. She's dying, and I can't. She's not dying. We're not letting her. Elias grabbed Hannah's shoulders, made her look at him. You hear me? We're not giving up on her. She's a fighter. She survived this long, survived things that should have killed her. She's going to survive this too. You don't know that. I know she's got you for a mother, and you're the strongest person I've ever met. So we fight. Understand? We fight until there's nothing left to fight with. Something in his words got through to Hannah. She nodded, wiped her eyes, and went back to caring for her daughter with renewed determination. Night fell. The fever raged on. Lucy drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes crying weakly, sometimes dangerously still. Elias and Hannah worked through the dark hours, taking turns so one could rest while the other watched. But neither really slept, just sat in anxious vigil, waiting for the crisis to pass one way or the other. Somewhere around 3 a.m, Elias dozed off in the chair beside the bed. He woke to Hannah's voice, sharp with fear. Elias! Elias! He was up instantly, his heart pounding. What? What is it? She's not breathing. I can't feel her breathing. Elias bent over the bed, his ear to Lucy's mouth. For one terrible moment he felt nothing. No breath. No movement. No. He'd failed again. Let another child die while he was supposed to be protecting her. History repeating in the cruelest way possible. Then, there. The faintest brush of air against his cheek. Shallow, barely there, but breath. She's breathing, he said, his voice cracking with relief. It's shallow, but she's breathing. Hannah collapsed against him, her body shaking with sobs. Elias held her, this woman who'd been so strong for so long, finally breaking under the weight of her fear. He held her and let her cry and whispered promises he had no business making. She's going to be okay. She's going to make it. I swear to you, Hannah, she's going to be okay. He didn't know if he believed it, but he needed her to believe it, needed her to keep fighting. So he held her and lied with all the conviction he could muster. Dawn came gray and cold. Lucy's fever had dropped slightly. Not enough, but it was something. She was sleeping more peacefully now, less fitful. The worst might be over, or they might just be in the eye of the storm. Hannah sat beside the bed, holding Lucy's small hand, her eyes red-rimmed and hollow with exhaustion. Elias made coffee, forced Hannah to drink some, tried to get her to eat. She refused the food but accepted the coffee, wrapping her hands around the cup like it could warm parts of her the fire couldn't reach. I can't lose her, she said, her voice barely audible. She's all I have left. If she dies, she won't. You can't promise that. No. But I can promise that we're doing everything possible, that we're not giving up, that we'll fight as long as there's fight in us. He sat down beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. And I can promise that whatever happens, you're not alone. You don't have to carry this by yourself. Hannah turned to look at him, and in her eyes he saw everything she was too exhausted and scared to say. The gratitude, the fear, the something else that had been building between them for weeks and had no name yet. Why? She whispered. Why do you care so much? We're nothing to you. We were supposed to leave today. I turned the wagon around, Elias said simply. The moment she got sick, I turned it around. Does that sound like you're nothing to me? I don't understand. Neither do I. He reached out and took her free hand, the one not holding Lucy's. All I know is that 3 months ago I was alone in a cabin that felt like a tomb, going through the motions of living without actually being alive. And then you showed up and everything changed. The cabin started feeling like a home again. I started looking forward to waking up instead of dreading it. I started remembering how to feel something other than grief. Elias, let me finish, please. He took a breath. I know we haven't known each other long. I know this is complicated, but the truth is, somewhere along the way, you and Lucy stopped being guests and started being, he faltered, searching for the right word. Started being necessary. To me. To my life. And the thought of you leaving, of going back to that emptiness, Hannah, I can't do it. Tears were streaming down Hannah's face now, and she was shaking her head even as she gripped his hand tighter. You're just scared. The situation, the fear. It's making you feel things that aren't real. This is real. This is the most real thing I've felt in 15 years. You barely know me. I know enough. I know you're brave and stubborn and fierce. I know you'd walk through a blizzard to save your child. I know you make terrible jokes when you're nervous, and you hum when you think no one's listening. I know you take your coffee with too much sugar, and you hate washing dishes, but you do it anyway. He moved closer, his eyes locked on hers. I know that when you smile, actually smile, not that polite thing you do for strangers, but a real smile, it lights up everything around you. And I know that I want to see that smile every day for whatever time we have left. What are you saying? I'm saying stay, not as a guest, not until spring or until the road's clear or until you find something better. Just stay, build a life here. Let me help you raise Lucy. Let me be... He stopped, terrified and exhilarated all at once. Let me be part of your family. Hannah stared at him, her mouth open, clearly shocked into silence. On the bed, Lucy stirred, made a small sound. Both of them turned instantly, but she was just shifting in her sleep, not waking. When Hannah looked back at Elias, her expression was anguished. I can't ask you to do that. To take on someone else's child, someone else's responsibility. You're not asking, I'm offering. There's a difference. But why? Why would you want this? We come with so much baggage, so many problems. You could find someone. I don't want someone. I want you. The words came out raw, honest. Both of you. I want mornings with bad coffee and Lucy's laugh and your terrible singing. I want arguments over stupid things and quiet evenings and all the ordinary moments that make up a life. I want to stop hiding from feeling things. I want to stop being afraid that caring about someone means losing them. What if you do lose us? Hannah's voice broke. What if Lucy doesn't make it? What if I get sick or something happens? Life doesn't give guarantees, Elias. You know that better than anyone. I do know that, but I also know that hiding from life to avoid pain just means you never really live at all. I've spent 15 years in that prison, and I'm done. I'd rather have one real day with you than 1,000 safe, empty ones alone. Hannah closed her eyes, and tears leaked from beneath her lashes. You're asking me to believe in something I'm not sure exists anymore. Hope. Future. The idea that good things can last. I'm not asking you to believe anything. I'm just asking you to stay. Let the rest figure itself out as we go. For a long moment, Hannah said nothing, just sat there with her eyes closed, holding her daughter's hand in one of hers and Elias's in the other. He could see her processing, weighing, fighting with herself. Finally, she opened her eyes and looked at him. Really looked at him, past the surface to whatever lay beneath. He let her look, let her see all of it. The loneliness, the grief, the desperate hope that maybe, just maybe, he got a second chance at this. If I stay, she said slowly, it's not because I need saving. It's not because I have nowhere else to go. It's because I choose to, because I want to. Is that clear? Relief flooded through Elias so strong it left him dizzy. Crystal clear. And Lucy comes first, always. If you can't accept that, I wouldn't want it any other way. And I need time to figure this out, to understand what I'm feeling. I can't just jump into whatever this is without thinking it through. Take all the time you need. I'm not going anywhere. Hannah nodded slowly, and something in her face relaxed. Not all the tension. There was still too much fear for Lucy, too much uncertainty about everything else. But some of the desperate loneliness that had been there since the day Elias found her in the barn seemed to ease. Okay, she whispered. Okay, we'll stay. The next hours were the longest of Elias's life. Lucy's fever fluctuated, rising and falling in waves that left them both exhausted from the emotional whiplash. Every time it spiked, they fought it back down with cool cloths and medicine. Every time she seemed to improve, they held their breath, afraid to hope. But slowly, gradually, the fever began to break for real. By late afternoon of the second day, Lucy's temperature had dropped to nearly normal. Her breathing was steady. Her color was better. And when Hannah tried to give her some water, she swallowed it down and looked at her mother with eyes that were aware, present, alive. "Mama," Lucy said. It was barely a whisper, but it was the most beautiful sound either of them had ever heard. Hannah burst into tears, pulling her daughter close, rocking her, and murmuring thanks to whatever forces had spared her child. Elias stood back, giving them space. His own eyes burning with tears, he didn't try to hide. They'd done it. Against odds that had seemed impossible, against his own history of failure and loss, they'd saved her. That night, with Lucy sleeping peacefully and Hannah dozing in the chair beside the bed, Elias stood at the window looking out at the dark Montana landscape. The same view he'd looked at for 15 years, but somehow it seemed different now. Less empty. Less like a prison. He thought about Sarah and Emma, about the life they'd had together. The guilt he'd carried for so long felt lighter somehow, not gone, but manageable. He thought they'd understand this, him finding a way forward, opening his heart again. Sarah had never wanted him to be alone. She'd made him promise, in those last coherent moments before the fever took her completely, to find happiness again, to live. He'd thought that promise was impossible to keep, but maybe, just maybe, he'd been wrong. Behind him, he heard Hannah stir. He turned to find her watching him from the chair, Lucy cradled against her chest. "Can't sleep?" she asked quietly. "Too much to think about." "Second thoughts?" Elias crossed to her, knelt down beside the chair so they were eye level. Lucy was deeply asleep, her face peaceful in a way it hadn't been for days. Hannah looked exhausted but relieved, the worst of the fear finally draining away. "No second thoughts," he said firmly. "You?" Hannah reached out and touched his face, her fingers gentle against his beard. It was the first time she'd initiated contact beyond necessity, and the intimacy of it made his breath catch. "I'm terrified," she admitted. "Terrified of trusting this. Terrified of what it means. Terrified that I'm making a huge mistake." "And?" "And I'm staying anyway. Because being terrified and alone sounds a lot worse than being terrified with you." Elias caught her hand, pressed it against his cheek. "That's the most romantic thing anyone's ever said to me." Hannah laughed, the sound surprised out of her. "That's pathetic." "Maybe, but it's true." He smiled at her, feeling lighter than he had in years. "We're going to be okay. All of us." "You sound pretty sure." "I am. We just fought death for 2 days and won. Everything else is going to seem easy by comparison." "I don't know if that's optimism or insanity." "Probably both." They sat there in comfortable silence, watching Lucy sleep, watching the night deepen outside the windows. There was still so much to figure out, practical things like sleeping arrangements, and what people would say and how to build a life from the broken pieces they'd both been carrying. But for now, this was enough. The breaking point had come and gone, and on the other side of it, something new was beginning. Something fragile and uncertain, but real. Outside, spring continued its slow advance on winter. Inside, 3 people who'd nearly lost everything began the careful work of building something worth keeping. Lucy's recovery was slow but steady. 3 days after the fever broke, she was sitting up again, reaching for her toys with the determined concentration that had become familiar. A week later, she was crawling, then pulling herself up on furniture, reclaiming all the milestones the illness had temporarily stolen. Hannah barely let her out of sight, watching her with the fierce protectiveness of someone who'd come too close to losing everything. Elias watched them both, this woman and child who'd become the center of his carefully reconstructed world, and felt something he'd thought was dead forever stirring back to life. It wasn't the same as what he'd felt for Sarah and Emma, that love had been young and untested, built in easier times. This was different, harder won, forged in crisis and survival and the shared understanding of how fragile life could be. It scared him how much he cared, how quickly they'd become essential. The spring thaw continued, turning the world into mud and slush and the promise of green things. The cattle grew restless in their winter quarters, and Elias started the work of preparing for calving season. It was familiar work, good work, but now when he came in at the end of the day, there was warmth waiting. Hannah's cooking, Lucy's babbling, the simple comfort of not being alone. But there was also an awkwardness neither of them quite knew how to navigate. They'd said things during Lucy's illness, raw, honest things that couldn't be unsaid. Elias had asked Hannah to stay, to build a life with him. She'd agreed, but neither had addressed what that actually meant in practice. Were they just housemates sharing space, friends helping each other survive? Something more that neither had the courage to name? The uncertainty hung between them like smoke, visible but intangible, impossible to grasp or clear away. 2 weeks after the crisis, on a morning when the sun actually felt warm for the first time all year, Elias found Hannah in the kitchen staring at the closed nursery door. She had Lucy on her hip, and the baby was reaching toward the door with curious fingers, babbling questions in her own language. "I've been thinking," Hannah said without turning around. "About that room. It's just sitting there, and Lucy's getting too big for the drawer. She needs a proper bed." Elias felt his chest tighten. He'd opened the door, yes, but only once. Hadn't been back inside since that night with Hannah. The idea of actually using it, of filling it with life again, was both what he wanted and what terrified him most. "You want to put her in there?" His voice came out rougher than intended. "Only if you're okay with it. I know what that room means to you, but it seems wrong to leave it empty when Lucy needs it." Hannah finally turned to look at him. "We could fix it up, clean it out, make it new." Make it new. Not erase what it had been, but transform it. Let it serve the purpose it was meant for again. "Yeah," Elias said, the words scraping past the lump in his throat. "Yeah, let's do that." They spent the afternoon in the nursery together. Hannah cleaned while Elias assessed what could be salvaged and what needed replacing. The curtains Sarah had made were yellowed with age, but still serviceable. The cradle Elias had built was solid, just needed some fresh varnish. The rocking chair needed new cushions. Lucy crawled around exploring every corner with the fearless curiosity of babies who haven't learned that the world can hurt them. She pulled books off the small shelf, banged on the walls, tried to eat everything she could reach. Normal baby chaos that the room had been waiting 15 years to witness again. "Tell me about her," Hannah said, running a cloth over the windowsill. "Emma, what was she like?" Elias had been dreading this question, but also needing to answer it. To make Emma real again through words, through memory, spoken aloud instead of locked away. "Loud," he said, and surprised himself with a laugh. Sarah used to say she came out screaming and never really stopped. Not crying, just making noise, singing, babbling, yelling for the pure joy of hearing her own voice. He picked up a small wooden horse he'd carved, turned it over in his hands. She loved this thing, carried it everywhere. Called it Hossy, because she couldn't say horse yet. "She sounds wonderful." She is. I don't know what tense to use for dead children. The words came out bitter, and he regretted them immediately. But Hannah just nodded, understanding. "I do that with Thomas. Try to talk about him in present tense because past tense feels like erasing him. But he's not here, so present tense is a lie too." They worked in silence for a while, both lost in their own memories. Lucy found the mobile that had hung over Emma's crib and shrieked with delight, batting at it with her small hands. The sound echoed in the room that had been silent too long. "There's something I need to tell you," Elias said abruptly. The words had been building for days, and he couldn't hold them back anymore. "About that night, when Sarah and Emma died." Hannah stopped cleaning and gave him her full attention, waited. "I wasn't here. I was at the neighbor's place, playing cards, drinking too much. Having a good time while they were here, burning up with fever." His hands tightened on the wooden horse. "If I'd been here, maybe I could have done something. Ridden for the doctor sooner, kept them cool, something." "Or maybe you would have died too," Hannah said quietly. "The fever took half the valley that winter. You told me that yourself. But I'll never know, and that's what kills me. The not knowing. The wondering if my being selfish, staying out late, cost them their lives." Hannah crossed to him, took the wooden horse from his hands, and set it down carefully. Then she took both his hands in hers and looked him straight in the eye. Listen to me. You were human. Humans make mistakes, have fun, live their lives. You didn't kill them. The fever did. And you surviving doesn't make you guilty. It makes you lucky in the cruelest possible way. Her grip tightened. I know about guilt. I know about the what-ifs that eat you alive, but I also know that drowning in them doesn't honor the people we lost. Living does. Moving forward does. I don't know if I know how. Neither do I. But maybe we can figure it out together. They stood there in the nursery, hands linked, Lucy playing at their feet, and Elias felt something shift. Not the grief disappearing, that would always be there, a part of him like his bones, but maybe the shape of it changing. Becoming something he could carry instead of something that crushed him. I want to tell you something, Hannah said, about why I agreed to stay. Okay. It's not because I had nowhere else to go. I could have made it work in town somehow. Would have been hard, would have struggled, but I could have survived. She paused, choosing her words carefully. I stayed because when I look at you, I see someone who understands, who knows what it's like to lose everything and keep going anyway, who doesn't expect me to be over it or moved on or anything other than exactly where I am. I'm not sure that's much of a reason. It's the best reason, because I'm so tired of pretending to be fine when I'm not, of putting on a brave face and soldiering through. With you, I don't have to do that. I can just be broken and trying to heal, and that's enough. Elias pulled her closer until their foreheads touched. Lucy, noticing her mother's distraction, crawled over and grabbed onto Hannah's skirt, pulling herself up with a triumphant squeal. We're a mess, he said. We really are. Think we can be a mess together? Make it work somehow? I think we're already doing it. Over the next week, they transformed the nursery. Elias repainted the walls a soft blue. Hannah sewed new curtains from fabric she found in town during a supply run. They cleaned the cradle until it gleamed, and Elias carved Lucy's name into the headboard the same way he'd carved Emma's 15 years before. The rocking chair got new cushions that Hannah stuffed with wool from sheep she'd discovered Elias kept in a pasture he rarely mentioned. You have sheep? She'd asked when he brought the wool home. About 20. They mostly take care of themselves. Kept meaning to expand the flock, but never got around to it. Is there anything you don't have on this ranch? Company, at least until recently. She'd smiled at that, quick and real, and Elias had counted it as a victory. The day they moved Lucy into her new room, Hannah cried. Not sad tears, she insisted, but something else. Relief maybe, or gratitude, or just the overwhelming emotion of watching her daughter get something Hannah had thought they'd never have. A real home, stability, a future that looked hopeful instead of desperate. Lucy loved her new room immediately. She spent hours in the cradle playing with her toys, reaching for the mobile, babbling at the walls. At night, Hannah would rock her in the chair and sing soft lullabies, and sometimes Elias would stand in the doorway watching, his heart so full it hurt. One night, Hannah caught him standing there and smiled. You can come in, you know, it's not a private show. Elias entered, feeling like he was crossing some invisible threshold. He sat on the floor near the rocking chair, and Lucy immediately reached for him, wanting to be held. Hannah passed her over without hesitation, trusting him with her most precious thing. She's getting so big, Elias said, settling Lucy against his chest. The baby yawned, fighting sleep the way she always did, convinced she might miss something important. I know, sometimes I miss her being tiny, even though those early days were so hard. Hannah's voice went soft. Thomas never got to see her like this, never got to see her smile or hear her laugh. He missed everything. I'm sorry. Me too, but I think... She paused, watching Lucy's eyes drift closed against Elias's shoulder. I think he'd be glad she has you, that we both do. He always wanted me to be happy, to have help, to not do everything alone. Tell me about him, if you want to. So Hannah talked about Thomas, about their courtship and marriage, and the dreams they'd built together. And Elias talked about Sarah, about the life they'd planned that had been cut short. They shared their dead with each other there in the nursery, making room for the past while building toward the future. When Lucy was fully asleep, Elias carried her to the cradle and laid her down gently. She stirred but didn't wake, just curled onto her side with her thumb in her mouth. Hannah tucked a blanket around her, smoothed her dark hair back from her forehead. "Thank you," she whispered, "for this, for letting her have this room. I know how hard it must be." "It's not hard. Not anymore." Elias looked around the room, at the blue walls and new curtains and mobile turning slowly in the draft. "It feels right, like this is what it was meant for all along." They stood there together, watching Lucy sleep, and Elias felt something settle in his chest, a rightness, a sense of pieces falling into place after being scattered for too long. But there was still one more piece that needed addressing, one more conversation they'd been avoiding. Later that night, after they'd left Lucy's door cracked open and retreated to the main room, Elias built up the fire and poured them both coffee. Hannah settled into her usual chair, and they sat in the comfortable silence that had become their default. But Elias could feel the unasked questions hanging between them. "We need to talk," he said finally, "about what we're doing here. What this is." Hannah's hands tightened on her cup. "Okay. I meant what I said, about wanting you to stay, about wanting to be part of your life, Lucy's life. But I realize I never asked what you want, beyond just staying, I mean." "What I want?" "Hannah, I'm 43 years old, set in my ways, living in the middle of nowhere with no society, no neighbors close by, nothing but work and weather and the same routine day after day." He looked at her steadily. "That's my life. Is that what you want? Because if it's not, if you're just staying because you don't have better options, then we need to be honest about that." Hannah was quiet for a long moment, and Elias forced himself not to fill the silence, to let her think, to really consider what he was asking. "I'm 24 years old," she said finally. "I've been married and widowed. I've had a child and nearly lost her. I've been abandoned by people I trusted and saved by a stranger who owed me nothing." She met his eyes. "I've lived a lifetime already, Elias. I'm not some young girl with romantic notions about what life should be. I know it's hard. I know it hurts. I know that promises don't mean much when luck runs the wrong way." "That's not really an answer. Because I'm not done," she smiled slightly. "What I want is something real, something honest. I don't need excitement or adventure or anything grand. I just need," she struggled for the words, "I need someone who won't leave, who'll stay through the hard parts, who understands that some days all I can manage is getting through to the next day, and that's enough. I can do that. I know. That's why I'm here." She set her coffee down and leaned forward. "But I need you to understand something too. I'm not Sarah. I'm never going to be her. And Lucy's not Emma. We can't fill those holes in your heart, and I'm not going to try." "I don't want you to," Elias said firmly. "I love Sarah. I loved Emma. But they're gone. And what I feel for you, it's not a replacement or a substitute. It's something new, something different." "What do you feel for me?" The question hung there, direct and unavoidable. Elias could dodge it, could retreat into vague pleasantries and avoid naming the thing that had been growing between them for months. But he'd spent 15 years hiding from truth, and he was done. "I love you," he said simply. "I don't know when it happened exactly. Maybe it was that first night when you were half dead and still reaching for your baby. Maybe it was watching you put yourself back together piece by piece. Maybe it was just the accumulation of 1,000 small moments. You singing while you cook, the way you argue with me about stupid things, how fierce you are when it comes to protecting Lucy." He took a breath. "I know it's too soon. I know you might not feel the same way. But you asked what I feel, and that's it. I love you. Both of you." Hannah's eyes were bright with tears. "You're right. It is too soon. I know. I'm not ready to say those words back, not yet. There's too much. I'm still grieving Thomas, still figuring out who I am without him. It wouldn't be fair to you. I understand. But," she continued, her voice stronger now, "I care about you. More than I thought I could care about anyone after losing Thomas. And when I think about the future, about where I want to be and who I want to be with, you're in that picture. You and this ranch and building something together. That's enough," Elias said, and meant it. More than enough. "Is it? Because I need you to be sure. If you're doing this out of guilt or loneliness or some misplaced sense of responsibility, stop." He crossed to her chair, knelt down in front of her the way he had during Lucy's illness. I'm doing this because I want to. Because for the first time in 15 years, I want something more than just getting through the day. I want a life with you in it. I want to watch Lucy grow up. I want to argue about whether we need more chickens and whose turn it is to wash dishes. I want all of it, the good and the bad and the boring in between. Hannah reached out and touched his face, her fingers tracing the lines around his eyes. You're sure? I've never been more sure of anything. Then I have a question. She took a breath, nervous now. Would you marry me? Not right away, not until I'm ready, but eventually. Would you want that? Elias felt his heart stutter in his chest. Are you proposing to me? I'm asking if you'd say yes if I did, someday. Yes. The word came out immediately, no hesitation. Whenever you're ready, however you want to do it, yes. Hannah laughed, and it sounded like relief and joy and the beginning of something neither could name yet, but both could feel. Okay then? Okay. That night, they made plans. Real plans for a real future. They'd fix up the ranch house properly, make it a real home instead of just a place Elias had been existing. They'd expand the herd, maybe get those chickens Hannah mentioned. In the fall, when Lucy was older and the harvest was in, they'd go to town and make it legal. Not a big wedding, neither of them wanted that, but something official, something real, and Elias would officially adopt Lucy, make her his daughter-in-law as well as in heart. The conversation went late into the night, both of them suddenly unable to stop talking, planning, dreaming. It had been so long since either had dared to hope for anything beyond basic survival that actually building a future felt revolutionary. When they finally went to bed, Elias to his makeshift setup in the main room, Hannah to the bedroom. Elias lay awake staring at the ceiling, his mind too full for sleep. Everything had changed so fast. 4 months ago, he'd been alone, convinced he'd die that way. Now he had a family, a future, a reason to fix the sagging porch and plant a garden and think about next year, 5 years from now, 10. It was terrifying. It was wonderful. It was both and neither, and everything in between. In the bedroom, he heard Lucy wake with a small cry, heard Hannah's footsteps, her soft voice soothing, the creak of the rocking chair as she settled in to comfort her daughter. The ordinary sounds of a life being lived, a family being built from the broken pieces two strangers had brought to each other on a winter night. Elias closed his eyes and let himself imagine it. Years from now, Lucy running through the house, maybe siblings chasing after her, Hannah's garden in full bloom, neighbors coming over for dinner, the kind of normal, beautiful life he'd thought was gone forever. He could see it, could almost touch it, and for the first time in 15 years, he let himself believe it was possible. The locked door was open, the room was alive again, and Elias Grant, who'd survived by shutting himself off from feeling, was learning to live by opening his heart. It wouldn't be easy. There would be hard days, setbacks, moments when the grief came back strong enough to knock them both down. But they'd face it together. 3 people who'd found each other in the dark and decided to build something in the light. Tomorrow he'd start fixing the porch, plant that garden, make the ranch into the kind of place where a child could grow up happy and safe. But tonight, he just listened to the sounds of his family and felt grateful beyond words that he'd checked the barn on that Christmas night, that he'd found them, that he'd made the choice to care when caring had seemed impossible. Everything had changed, and Elias was finally ready for it. Spring came in earnest, transforming the Montana landscape from white to green almost overnight. The snow melted in rushing streams that fed the creek running through Elias's property. Wildflowers pushed through the mud, painting the hillsides in colors that seemed too bright after months of monochrome winter. The cattle were turned out to pasture, their calves kicking up their heels in the sunshine, and the whole world felt like it was waking up from a long, cold sleep. Elias woke up too. Not all at once, but in increments. Small changes that accumulated into something bigger. He started humming while he worked, catching himself and realizing he'd picked up the habit from Hannah. He fixed the sagging porch, replaced rotted boards, built proper steps instead of the makeshift ones he'd been using for years. He cleaned out the spare room and turned it into a proper storage space instead of a dumping ground for things he couldn't bear to look at but couldn't bring himself to throw away. He was building instead of just maintaining, planning instead of just surviving, and it felt good in a way he'd forgotten was possible. Hannah bloomed with the spring. The thinness that had worried Elias when he first found her filled out with regular meals and the absence of constant fear. Her face lost its gaunt, haunted look and became something softer, more open. She smiled more, laughed easier, and sometimes Elias would catch her singing while she worked in the garden she'd started planting. Real singing, not just humming, and the sound was better than any music he'd ever heard. Lucy grew like a weed, hitting new milestones every week. She took her first real steps in late April, tottering from the sofa to Elias's outstretched hands with a look of fierce concentration. When she made it, she shrieked with triumph and immediately tried again, falling on her bottom, but undeterred. Within days she was walking everywhere, getting into everything, a tiny whirlwind of chaos and joy. "We need to baby-proof this place," Hannah said one evening after finding Lucy trying to climb into the fireplace for the third time that day. "She's fearless. It's going to get her killed. She's exploring, learning. That's good." "That's easy for you to say. You're not the one whose heart stops every time she heads for the stairs." Elias looked at Hannah, saw the genuine worry in her eyes, and realized something. "You're terrified something's going to happen to her." "Of course I am. Aren't you?" "Yeah, but I think—" He paused, trying to articulate something he'd been feeling but hadn't named yet. "I think being terrified means we're living again. Really living, not just going through the motions. Because we have something to lose." Hannah was quiet for a moment, watching Lucy pull herself up on a chair and immediately reach for a cup that was definitely too close to the edge. "That's either very wise or very stupid. Probably both." He got up and moved the cup before Lucy could grab it. She gave him a look of pure betrayal and toddled off to find something else to get into. They baby-proofed the cabin that weekend, moving anything dangerous or breakable to higher shelves, blocking off the stairs with a makeshift gate Elias built. It made the place look cluttered and chaotic, nothing like the sterile neatness Elias had maintained for 15 years. But it also made it look lived in, real, like a home where an actual family resided instead of a museum to loss. One warm afternoon in early May, Hannah came to find Elias in the barn where he was repairing a saddle. Lucy was napping, giving Hannah a rare moment of free time, and she'd used it to bake bread. The smell of it had been drifting from the cabin all morning, making Elias's mouth water. "I've been thinking," she said, settling onto a hay bale and watching him work. "About the wedding." Elias's hand stilled on the leather. They'd talked about marriage in abstract terms someday and eventually, but Hannah hadn't brought it up in weeks. He'd been giving her space, letting her work through her grief for Thomas at her own pace, but the waiting was harder than he wanted to admit. "What about it?" he asked, keeping his voice casual. "I think I'm ready. Not immediately, but soon. Maybe after the calving season is done and before harvest starts. June, maybe. Would that work for you?" Elias set down the saddle and turned to face her fully. "Hannah, you don't have to rush this because you think I'm expecting it. I meant what I said. I'll wait as long as you need." "I know, but I'm not rushing. I've been thinking about it for weeks, and She took a breath. "I'm ready. I'll never stop loving Thomas. He'll always be Lucy's father, always be part of my story. But he's not my future, you are. And I don't want to wait anymore." The words hit Elias square in the chest, knocking the air from his lungs. "You're sure?" "I'm sure." She smiled, and it was that real smile, the one that lit up everything around her. "I want to marry you, Elias Grant. I want to build this life we've been planning. I want Lucy to legally be yours. I want all of it." Elias crossed to her, pulled her up from the hay bale and into his arms. She came willingly, wrapping her arms around his neck, and for a moment they just held each other in the quiet barn, while dust motes danced in the sunlight streaming through the cracks in the walls. "June," he said into her hair. "We'll do it in June. Nothing fancy, just us, and whoever we need to make it legal. That's all I want, too." Hannah pulled back enough to look at him, her eyes searching his face. "You know people are going to talk about how fast this is happening, about the circumstances. Some of them won't understand. Let them talk. I don't care what people think." You might care when they're saying I trapped you, that I'm taking advantage of your kindness, that I'm just looking for security. Elias cupped her face in his hands, made sure she was looking at him. Anyone who looks at us and doesn't see two people choosing each other isn't worth listening to. You didn't trap me. I asked you to stay, remember? And you're not taking advantage. You've given me back something I thought I'd lost forever. What's that? A reason to wake up in the morning. Hannah's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. You're getting sentimental in your old age. I'm 43, not ancient. Tell that to your creaky knees when you get up in the morning. He laughed and kissed her, the first real kiss they'd shared. It was soft and tentative at first, both of them nervous, both carrying the weight of past loves and present fears. But then Hannah's hands tightened in his hair, and Elias pulled her closer, and it became something more. A promise. A beginning. A choice made and confirmed. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless, Hannah was blushing like a girl. Well, she said, that was worth waiting for? I was going to say terrifying, but sure, we'll go with your version. They planned the wedding over the next few weeks, fitting it in between the endless work of running a ranch and raising a toddler. It would be simple, they decided. They'd go to Redemption, find the circuit judge who came through once a month, make it legal. Maybe have dinner at the boarding house afterward to celebrate. Nothing fancy, nothing that required preparation they didn't have time for. But Hannah surprised him one evening by showing him a dress she'd been working on in secret. It was simple, pale blue cotton with white lace at the collar and cuffs, but it was clearly special, wedding special. I know we said nothing fancy, she said, holding it up almost shyly, but I wanted it to feel different, important, not just another day. Elias touched the fabric, thought about Sarah's wedding dress packed away in a trunk somewhere, thought about how different this was from his first wedding. That had been a big affair, half the county invited, dancing and drinking and celebration. This would be quiet, private, just them and the life they were building. He liked this better. It's perfect, he said. You'll be beautiful. I'll be nervous. That too. The week before the wedding, Elias made a trip to town by himself. He needed supplies, he told Hannah, and the ride would give him time to think, which was true, but not the whole truth. Redemption hadn't changed much in the months since he'd last been there. Same dusty main street, same handful of businesses, same people going about their lives with the steady persistence of folks who'd chosen to make a home in hard country. A few people nodded to him as he passed, and he nodded back, aware that he'd become something of a mystery to them over the years. The hermit rancher who never came to town except for absolute necessities, who'd shut himself away after losing his family. Well, that was about to change. He stopped at the general store first, picking up flour and sugar and the other supplies Hannah had listed. Mrs. Henderson, who ran the store, raised her eyebrows when she saw the quantities. Stocking up for something special, Elias? Getting married next week. Her eyes went wide. Married? To who? I didn't even know you were courting anyone. Her name's Hannah Reed. She's been staying at my place since winter. Has a baby daughter, Lucy. The calculation in Mrs. Henderson's eyes was instant and obvious. Winter to spring, a woman and baby appearing out of nowhere, marriage happening fast. Elias could see her putting together a story that probably wasn't flattering to either him or Hannah. I see, she said carefully. Well, congratulations, I suppose. Thank you. Elias paid for his supplies, not bothering to correct whatever assumptions she was making. Hannah had been right. People would talk. But he meant what he'd said. He didn't care. His next stop was the assayer's office, which also served as the unofficial record keeper for the area. He found Mr. Patterson hunched over his desk, squinting at some document through thick spectacles. Elias Grant, Patterson said, looking up in surprise. Didn't expect to see you in town. What can I do for you? I need to file some papers. Adoption papers. Adoption? Patterson pulled out a form, dipped his pen in ink. Who are you adopting? Lucy Reed. She's 7 months old. Her father's dead. Her mother's agreed to let me adopt her when we marry next week. Patterson wrote it all down, asking the necessary questions, filling out the legal requirements. When he was done, he looked at Elias with something like curiosity. You know, I've known you since you were a boy. Knew your father before you. Watched you build that ranch from nothing. Watched you lose your family. Watched you close yourself off afterward." He paused. "Glad to see you rejoining the living." "So am I," Elias said, and meant it. His final stop was the jeweler's, a tiny shop tucked between the boarding house and the church. The proprietor, a man named Kovacs who'd emigrated from Hungary 10 years back, looked up from the watch he was repairing. "Mr. Grant, this is unexpected pleasure. How can I help?" "I need a ring, wedding ring, something simple but well made." Kovacs smiled and pulled out a tray of rings. "For the lady or for you?" "Both." "Ah, so you're getting married. Congratulations." Kovacs began showing him options, explaining the differences in metals and stones and craftsmanship. Elias listened, trying to imagine which Hannah would like. In the end, he chose matching bands of plain gold, simple and unadorned. Not fancy, but solid, built to last. They reminded him of Hannah, no unnecessary decoration, just pure strength and beauty that didn't need embellishment. "Good choice," Kovacs said, wrapping them carefully. "Very good choice. May you have many happy years together." "That's the plan." Elias rode home as the sun was setting, his saddlebags full of supplies, and his pocket holding 2 small rings that represented a future he'd thought was impossible. The ranch came into view as twilight fell, and he saw lights in the windows, saw smoke rising from the chimney, saw Hannah's small garden beside the house, the vegetables just starting to poke through the soil, saw the porch he'd fixed, the fence he'd mended, all the small repairs that added up to making this place a home again. This was his life now, and it was good. Hannah met him at the door, Lucy on her hip. The baby reached for him immediately, babbling "da-da" in the way she'd started doing lately, even though they hadn't taught her. It made Elias's heart clench every time. "Did you get everything?" Hannah asked, letting him take Lucy while she helped with the saddlebags. "Everything and more." He kissed the top of Lucy's head, breathing in her baby smell. "How was your day?" "Lucy discovered mud. I discovered that mud is impossible to get out of everything. We're both exhausted." "She's going to be a ranch girl, that one. Can't avoid mud on a ranch." "I'm realizing that." Hannah started unpacking the supplies, organizing them in the kitchen. "Mrs. Chen from the neighboring ranch stopped by while you were gone." Elias stiffened. "What did she want?" "To introduce herself," she said. "Brought over some eggs and asked a lot of questions about how long I'd been here and where I came from and what my intentions were." Hannah's voice was dry. "I think the whole county knows about us by now. I may have mentioned our wedding plans at the general store. Let me guess, Mrs. Henderson? She's going to tell everyone." "I figured as much." Hannah didn't sound particularly bothered. Mrs. Chen was polite enough, but I could tell she was forming opinions, probably not flattering ones. "I don't care what Mrs. Chen thinks." "I know, but I do. A little." Hannah turned to face him. "I don't want people thinking badly of you because of me. You've lived here your whole life. These are your neighbors. And you're going to be my wife. That makes you more important than any of them." Lucy started fussing, wanting down, and Elias set her on the floor where she immediately toddled off toward her toys. He crossed to Hannah and took her hands. "Listen to me. People are going to think what they want to think. Some of them will understand, some won't. Some will judge us no matter what we do, but none of that matters as long as we know the truth." He squeezed her hands gently. "And the truth is, we found each other when we both needed finding. We chose each other, and we're building something real and good and honest. That's all that matters." Hannah nodded, but he could see the worry still lingering in her eyes. She'd been judged before, he realized. Probably spent her whole life being judged, for being poor, for being widowed, for having a child and no husband, for all the things women got judged for that men never did. "What if they're mean to Lucy?" she asked quietly. "What if the other children, when she's older, say cruel things because of how we started? Then we teach her that she's loved and wanted, and that's what matters. That she's ours by choice, which makes her even more special." He pulled Hannah close. "And if anyone's cruel to her, they'll answer to me." The wedding day came on a perfect June morning, all sunshine and blue sky and the kind of warmth that promised summer was coming. Elias woke early, too nervous to sleep, and did his chores in record time. He shaved carefully, put on his best clothes. Not much better than his everyday ones, but cleaner and less worn. Polished his boots until they shone. Hannah was already up when he came inside. Lucy fed and dressed in a small white dress that Hannah had somehow found time to make. Hannah herself was still in her regular clothes, the blue wedding dress laid out on the bed waiting. "I'm terrified," she admitted, bouncing Lucy to keep her entertained. "Is that normal?" "I'm terrified too, so yeah, probably normal." "What if I mess up the vows? What if Lucy cries through the whole thing? What if—" Elias kissed her, cutting off the spiral of worry. "It's going to be fine. Perfect even. Because at the end of it, we'll be married, and nothing else really matters." They loaded into the wagon an hour later, Hannah in her blue dress looking more beautiful than Elias had ever seen her, Lucy content in her mother's arms. The ride to Redemption took 2 hours over roads still muddy from spring rains. They didn't talk much, both lost in their own thoughts, both aware that they were crossing a threshold that couldn't be uncrossed. The town was busier than usual, some kind of market day happening in the square. People stared as they passed, recognizing Elias, curious about the woman beside him. Elias ignored them all, focused on getting to the courthouse where Judge Morrison held his monthly sessions. They found the judge in his temporary chambers, a small room at the back of the general store. He was an older man, gray-haired and grave, who'd seen enough of life to not be surprised by much. He looked at Elias and Hannah and Lucy without judgment, just professional assessment. "You're here to be married?" "Yes, sir," Elias said. "And the child?" "My daughter," Hannah said firmly. "Lucy Reed. She'll be Lucy Grant after today if the adoption papers go through." "I see." Morrison pulled out the necessary forms. "I'll need witnesses. 2 people who can attest to your identities and your willingness to enter into this marriage." Elias felt his stomach drop. He hadn't thought about witnesses, hadn't thought to ask anyone because he didn't have anyone to ask. 15 years of isolation meant 15 years of burned bridges and forgotten friendships. "I'll stand witness." The voice came from behind them, and Elias turned to find Mr. Kovacs, the jeweler, standing in the doorway. "I sold Mr. Grant the rings. I can attest to his identity and his intentions." "I'll be the second witness." Mrs. Chen stepped in beside Kovacs, and Elias stared at her in surprise. She gave him a small smile. "I met Mrs. Reed this week. She seems like a good woman, and anyone willing to take in a widow and her child deserves support, not gossip." Hannah's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you," she whispered. The ceremony itself was brief, just the legal requirements and the exchange of vows. Elias slipped the ring on Hannah's finger with hands that shook slightly, and she did the same for him, her voice steady and sure when she spoke the words that bound them together. Lucy, held by Mrs. Chen, watched with solemn eyes as if she understood the importance of what was happening. "By the power vested in me by the territory of Montana, I pronounce you husband and wife," Morrison said. "You may kiss your bride." Elias did, feeling the rightness of it settle into his bones. This was real. This was his life now. Hannah Reed, Hannah Grant, was his wife, and Lucy was his daughter, and he had a family again. When they separated, both were smiling despite the tears on Hannah's cheeks. Morrison had them sign the marriage certificate, along with the witnesses, making it official. Then he pulled out the adoption papers Elias had filed. Lucy Reed, age 7 months, is hereby adopted by Elias Grant with the consent of her mother, Hannah Reed Grant. Full parental rights and responsibilities transfer to Elias Grant, effective immediately. He stamped the papers with a decisive thud. "Congratulations, you're officially a father." Elias took Lucy from Mrs. Chen, held his daughter close, and felt something break open in his chest. The last wall, the final defense he'd been holding on to, crumbled completely. This tiny person was his, not by blood, but by choice, which somehow made it even more meaningful. "Hi, Lucy," he whispered. "Hi, daughter." Lucy grabbed his nose and laughed, delighted by this game she'd invented. And Elias laughed too, right there in the courthouse, with his new wife beside him and his daughter in his arms and witnesses who'd shown unexpected kindness. They had dinner at the boarding house as planned, a simple meal that felt like a celebration anyway. Kovacs and Mrs. Chen joined them, and what Elias had imagined would be an awkward affair turned into something warm and genuine. Mrs. Chen told stories about her own arrival in Montana 30 years ago, and Kovacs shared tales of leaving Hungary for a better life. They were all transplants in their own way, all people who'd chosen to start over in hard country. To new beginnings, Kovacs said, raising his glass, and to choosing family instead of being limited by blood. They all drank to that, even Lucy, who had milk instead of wine and made a face at the taste. The ride home was quiet, peaceful. Lucy fell asleep in Hannah's arms, exhausted by the day's excitement. Hannah leaned against Elias's shoulder, the gold band on her finger catching the late afternoon light. "How do you feel?" Elias asked. "Mrs. Grant?" "Strange," Hannah admitted. "Good, strange. Like I'm someone new, but also more myself than I've been in a long time." She paused. "How about you?" "Terrified, happy, grateful." He glanced at her. "Mostly terrified." "Of what?" "Messing this up somehow, not being what you need, failing you both the way I—" He stopped, couldn't finish the sentence. Hannah sat up so she could look at him properly. "You didn't fail Sarah and Emma. The fever failed them. Life failed them. You did everything you could. I wasn't there. You're here now, for us, every single day. That's what matters." They reached the ranch as the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that seemed almost too beautiful to be real. Elias helped Hannah down from the wagon, careful not to wake Lucy, and together they walked into their home. Their home. Not his home that she was staying in. Their home. The difference felt monumental. That night, after Lucy was asleep in her room and the dishes were washed and the day's excitement had settled into quiet contentment, Elias and Hannah sat on the porch watching the stars come out. The air was warm, full of the smell of growing things and the distant sound of cattle settling for the night. "I keep thinking about that night," Hannah said quietly. "Christmas night, when you found us in the barn. How close we came to dying. How easily this could have never happened. I think about it too. What if I'd checked the barn an hour later? What if I'd decided the storm was too bad and waited until morning? But you didn't. You checked when you did, and you found us, and you made a choice that changed everything." She turned to look at him, her face serious in the starlight. "I want you to know something. I didn't fall in love with you because you saved my life. I fell in love with you because of who you are. The way you're gentle with Lucy. The way you remember things I mention in passing. The way you're trying so hard to let yourself be happy again, even though it scares you." "Hannah, I'm not done," she smiled. "I love you, Elias Grant. I should have said it before, but I was scared. Scared it was too soon, scared of betraying Thomas's memory, scared of 100 things that don't matter anymore. But I love you, and I'm so glad I get to spend my life with you." Elias pulled her close, his heart so full he thought it might burst. "I love you too, both of you, more than I thought possible." They sat there for a long time, holding each other under the Montana stars, while inside their daughter slept peacefully and dreamed baby dreams. The ranch was quiet around them, but it was the quiet of life being lived, not the silence of life being avoided. 3 months ago, Elias had been alone in a house that felt like a tomb. Now he had a wife, a daughter, a future that looked bright instead of empty. It wasn't the life he'd planned. Sarah and Emma would always be part of his story, always be loved and remembered. But this was good too, different, but good. No, not just good. It was beautiful, hard-won and imperfect and absolutely beautiful. In the years that followed, people would ask Elias about that Christmas night, about finding Hannah and Lucy in his barn, about the choice he made to save them. And he'd tell them the truth, that he didn't feel like he'd saved them at all. They'd saved him, pulled him back from the edge of a grief that had been slowly killing him, showed him that life could begin again, not to replace what was lost, but to honor it by actually living. Lucy would grow up strong and fearless, a true ranch girl with her mother's determination and her father's steady heart. She'd never remember being that tiny baby in a freezing barn, but she'd grow up knowing she was chosen, loved, wanted beyond measure. Hannah would build the garden of her dreams, would fill the house with laughter and love and the ordinary chaos of family life, would give Elias 2 more children in the years to come. Siblings for Lucy who would run through the fields and play in the creek and grow up knowing they belonged. And Elias would wake up every morning grateful for the storm that had blown two strangers into his life, would tend his ranch and raise his children and love his wife with the fierce devotion of someone who knew exactly how precious and fragile all of it was. They would have hard days, times when the grief came back strong, when the losses they'd both suffered felt fresh and raw. But they'd face those days together, holding each other through the darkness until light came again. Because that's what family did. Not the family you were born into, but the family you chose. The family you built from broken pieces and desperate hope and the courage to try again. On that June night, with the stars wheeling overhead and the future stretching out before them full of possibility, Elias Grant held his wife close and thought about the locked door he'd finally opened. The nursery that was full of life again. The heart he'd thought was too broken to ever love again. Everything had changed that Christmas night. But the real change, the transformation that mattered, had been gradual. Built one day at a time, one choice at a time, one moment of courage at a time. And it had led him here. To this porch, this woman, this life. To a family chosen not by blood or circumstance, but by love and determination and the simple decision to open the door when someone knocked. Happy? Hannah asked, her head on his shoulder. Beyond words, Elias answered, and meant it with every fiber of his being. Inside, Lucy stirred in her sleep and sighed, content and safe in the home her parents had built for her. And outside, the Montana night stretched on forever, full of stars and promise and the quiet beauty of a life well lived. This was their story, a rescue that became a redemption, a Christmas night that changed everything, a family built not from perfection, but from the courage to try again. And it was, in every way that mattered, exactly right.